Welcome back to Stories with Facts. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into, all this stuff about HMPV, Human Metapneumovirus.
Right.
It's been making headlines. Like, I've seen it everywhere, from the Times and the Sunday Times to the New York Post and even the Scottish Sun.
Oh, wow.
So it's kind of everywhere. And then with all this, especially with all this concern about, the case numbers rising in China, what exactly is HMPV and
Well, it's interesting because HMPV actually isn't new. It was discovered in 2001, but research suggests it's been circulating for centuries, possibly even originating in birds 200 to 400 years ago.
Hey, birds. Okay, so not to freak out or anything, but is this another bird flu situation?
Mm-hmm.
Should we be worried about it making a jump from animals to humans?
Yeah.
But you mentioned a surge in cases, and the Chinese CDC is reporting some pretty alarming numbers.
Right.
What's the deal with that?
Well, they're seeing a spike, and HMPV is actually outpacing other common respiratory viruses in China right now.
Oh, wow.
Including COVID-19, rhinovirus, and adenovirus.
Really?
And they found a positivity rate of 6.2% for HMPV.
6.2%. That's huge.
It is.
And it's not just China, right? I've seen reports of rising cases globally. What's the situation in other parts of the world?
You're right, it's not just China. Malaysia, for example, is reporting a 45% increase in cases compared to last year.
Wow.
And while India isn't seeing a major surge right now, they're really emphasizing preparedness, which makes sense considering what's happening in neighboring countries. Sumya Swaminathan, the former chief scientist at the WHO, have stated that HMPV is unlikely to cause a pandemic on the scale of COVID-19.
Okay, that's good to hear. But honestly, I'm still a little wary. I mean, weren't we all caught off guard by COVID? How can we be so sure HMPV won't do the same?
Well, the thing is, HMPV is a known entity. Unlike COVID-19, which is a completely new virus, we've been tracking HMPV for decades. We understand its behavior, and crucially, many people already have some immunity to it due to past exposure. So it's not a level playing field like it was with COVID-19.
That makes sense. But even if a pandemic isn't likely, this surge is still concerning. What can we do to protect ourselves and our families from HMPV?
The good news is that the preventative measures are pretty straightforward and similar to what we already do for other respiratory illnesses. Things like frequent hand washing, covering coughs and sneezes with your elbow or a tissue, and cleaning frequently touched surfaces can go a long way in reducing the spread.
Right, those good old hygiene basics. But I'm curious, if HMPV has been around for a while, why hasn't there been more emphasis on developing a vaccine or treatment? It seems like it could be a big deal, especially for those more vulnerable groups.
That's a great question, and it really highlights how the spotlight can shift in the world of viruses. HMPV has often flown under the radar, unlike the flu, which has dedicated surveillance systems and annual vaccination campaigns. Part of the reason is that HMPV was only discovered relatively recently. Also, its symptoms are often indistinguishable from other common respiratory illnesses, making it harder to track and diagnose accurately. And until recently, it hasn't caused widespread severe outbreaks like some other viruses.
But until a vaccine or effective treatment becomes available, it seems like our primary defense is still those basic hygiene practices we discussed earlier.
Absolutely. Those preventative measures can't be emphasized enough. Regular hand washing, covering your coughs and sneezes, staying home when you're sick, and cleaning frequently touched surfaces can significantly reduce the spread of HMPV. And as an added bonus, those same practices are also effective against a wide range of other respiratory viruses circulating during the winter months.
It's like a universal shield against those common bugs that seem to make the rounds every year.
Yeah.
But even with this surge, you mentioned earlier that HMPV isn't likely to cause a pandemic like COVID-19. Can you remind us why that is?
Of course. A key factor is that HMPV is a known entity. We've been studying it for decades, and we have a good understanding of its typical behavior and transmission patterns.
Okay.
Also, a large portion of the population has already been exposed to HMPV, particularly during childhood, which means there's a level of existing immunity.
So those past encounters with HMPV, even if we didn't know it at the time, might be offering some protection now.
Exactly. That previous exposure can help dampen the spread and reduce the severity of illness. It's one of the reasons why, even with this surge, we're not seeing the same level of alarm as we did with COVID-19.
That's reassuring. But even though HMPV might not trigger a pandemic, the fact that it can cause serious complications, especially for vulnerable groups, is a reminder that we can't be complacent. We need to stay informed, take appropriate precautions, and seek medical advice when necessary.
Absolutely. Knowledge and awareness are our greatest tools in navigating the ever-changing landscape of infectious diseases.
This has been such an insightful conversation.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up our deep dive into HMPV, I'm curious, what's the one key takeaway you'd like our listener to remember?
That's a great question. I think the most important message is that while HMPV is generating headlines and causing some concern, it's not a reason to panic. It's a known virus with predictable patterns, and we have the knowledge and tools to protect ourselves and our communities.
That's a reassuring thought.